You're not going to accidentally wake up one day spending 3 hours a day praying in tongues or on your knees or however it is that the Lord has you praying during those 3 hours. It's not going to happen on accident. You have to make room. That's why one of the funny, oftentimes I'll hear people say to me, how in the world do you make money? They don't know all my stories about getting a word of knowledge for a guy and then his multimillionaire boss suddenly lavishing upon my wife and I ridiculous amounts of money to minister to different people. And they don't know the story, but because I don't sort of talk about it all the time with everybody I run into. But what happens is people are like, how in the world, what do you do? It seems like you're always praying at prayer meetings. How do you make money? And I tell people, it started when I was 22 years old. I started making room for prayer. I started having the rest of my life, scheduling the rest of my life around prayer. I didn't have a huge schedule and decide that I was going to fit God and fit prayer into my schedule. I began to make more and more and more room for God. And what happens is when you put God first, he puts you first. If your desire is to know him intimately, if your desire is to develop a world-changing, revolutionary prayer life, God will meet you there if you'll put your time, your money where your mouth is. When you start making room for Jesus, he makes more room for you. So it starts with a time price. The Lord gave me 3 prices to prayer. The second price was the heart price. And I apologize, my microphone is having a moment. So if you just give me just a moment here. All right, I'm back. I apologize if the sound isn't good. I'm not used to speaking with the microphone at this spot, but it's jacked up and I'll have to fix it after the podcast is over. But there was a second price that the Lord told me you need to be willing to pay once you've decided to pay the time price. You see, as you make room for God in prayer and you start paying that time price, one of the first issues that God is going to deal with is your own heart. See, the more time you spend on your face before him, the more aware of his presence that you become, the more aware of his glory, his love, his light. Your dirtiness becomes very obvious. Areas of your heart that aren't yet mature or that still need deliverance become way more obvious to you the more time you spend in prayer. And how many of you know that if your heart is full of anxiety could cloud your entire reality. If your heart is full of depression could cloud your entire reality. And so when I say that God will deal with your heart, I'm not just talking about somebody who keeps on drinking too much or somebody who has some sort of problem with perversion. No, I'm talking about areas of your heart that are so messed up that it is confusing your reality on many different levels. I had a dream some years ago where the Lord made something very clear to me. He made very clear to me that our heart being purified is the most important thing that's happening during our life on this earth. Our heart being purified so that we can see him more, so that we can see him better. And I had this dream, and in this dream, there was 5 people in my living room. And these were 5 of my closest friends. And in my dreams, usually people don't look like who they actually are. I'll see a man, he's my dad. He doesn't look like my dad, but in my dream, I know he's my dad. But this dream was different. Each person was exactly who they were. And in the dream, I could see them. And in this dream, suddenly, as I looked at one of my friends, Tony, my spirit jumped out of my body and it went into the person next to me, into their body. We're all standing in a circle. And my spirit went from that body to that body to that body to that body. And when I went into each person's body, I could see through their eyes and I could see what everybody looked like to them. And when I jumped from body to body to body, everybody looked so different, not like a little bit different. They might as well have been completely different people when I looked at them through their eyes. They might as well have been a different ethnicity. And it reminded me of a story I heard where there was this deliverance ministry where you'd be out at this retreat site and they would have everybody get in a big circle. And then they would come to somebody and they would say, I want you to find the ugliest person in the room and I want you to go and stare at them for 5 minutes. And I know that sounds just nuts. It sounded nuts to me when I heard that, but I've had this analogy ever since I heard that story. They would go and they would stare at this person for 5 minutes. Now, if you think that beauty it's the same to everybody, then everybody would have seen the same person as being the most ugly person in the room. But almost everybody picked somebody different. And they would go to the person who was the ugliest person in the room to them, and they would stare at them for 5 minutes. And as they were staring, all the leaders would be surrounded praying for them. And they would ask the person, why is this the ugliest person in the room to you? And inevitably, as the person thought about it and looked at the person, they realized that this person was ugly because they reminded them of somebody who had hurt them, or an incident where they had wounds in their life. An uncle, a dad, a teacher, a coach, an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend. So, and they would realize it's that how they even perceive a human's looks has to do with how their heart is. And when you get healed of those areas, suddenly somebody who might have been very ugly to you might be very beautiful. And so the Lord said, Scott, the second price is the heart price. You guys are all wandering around this earth in a bunch of unrealities. You've got some realities that are mine, but you have a lot of unrealities that are based on your heart being shattered. And I am the God who binds up the broken heart, who puts together the shattered heart. But it does take time, and it takes yielding over to me, and it takes growing and maturing. And so what happens is when people start paying the time price of prayer, sometimes the heart price is too expensive for them. They get scared out of the prayer closet. The first time I ever did 3 hours a day on my knees, I lasted for about a week, and I was scared out of the prayer closet, at least on my knees, for the next 3 months. I could pray in tongues still. I could pray liturgical prayers. I could pray at prayer meetings. I could pray over people. But I was terrified of getting down on my knees because 3 hours a day on my knees and the light of God was so bright. I was terrified. I mean, the fear of the Lord, I was undone. Like Isaiah saying, I'm a man of unclean lips amongst the people of unclean lips. And so even if you decide you're going to pay the time price, you also have to be willing to pay the heart price. Let God clean you out. Let him heal those broken areas. Your reality will change. Your circumstances will change. You know, I was told by a Hebrew scholar that the passage in Deuteronomy where it talks about blessed you'll be going in and blessed you'll be going out if you obey God. But if you disobey God, you'll be cursed going in and cursed going out. He said, you know, that picture of blessing is actually a flowing river that's not dammed up. And the picture of cursing is a river that's supposed to be flowing, but it's dammed up. And so our heart attitudes, our woundedness that causes us to perceive reality wrong, it's like a damming, it's like a curse that can prevent us from experiencing the flow of the river of God. And when the river of God is flowing, so is the provision of God, so is the purpose of God, so is the revelation of God.
You're the one the angels cry out to. You're the one the elders cast their crowns before. You're the one the angels